So my name is Clay T. White. I am the director of the Oral History Research Center at UNLV's library. So Las Vegas began officially in 1905, incorporated 1911, but in 1904, the surveyor who surveyed the property that was going to be sold to the railroad by Helen J. Stewart, that person's name is J.T. McWilliams, surveyed that property, and during his survey, he discovered that there were 80 acres of unclaimed land. He claimed it, he laid out a town site. Unfortunately, the town site that he laid out was west of the tracks, which he thought made a lot of sense because the water sources were west of the tracks. So that town site became the J.T. McWilliams town site. He laid it out, he began to sell lots there, and sold quite a few. And then that following year, 1905, the railroad actually came here officially, the owners, and they decided that they wanted downtown to be east of the railroad tracks. But they also owned all of the water rights. So east of the railroad tracks is exactly where downtown was laid out. They had this auction in May of 1905. People came into the town. They began to buy sites because it was downtown. So that's where they wanted their businesses. And a lot of those people who had purchased property from J.T. McWilliams then took their buildings, their shacks, and most of them were just shacks and tents at the time. They took them, put them on skids, and rode them across the tracks. So that area west of the tracks had been left with a few houses, a few people stayed there. It was kind of a rag town, just a few shacks and tents and things like that. This is the area that blacks moved into. African Americans began to build a community. Houses were not up to par, not the same standard of housing that you saw in the fledgling small white community here, but they were building community anyway.
What I found very interesting through the study was that what I discovered was that African American individual could not get a loan, a mortgage for a house, but they could get a loan to buy a car.
Mm-hmm. The documentary on the west side. So we just drive around. I was showing them around.
So this is Berkeley Square.
Yeah, Berkeley Square. They got
this is the first.
It's the first housing tract they had. They built over here for black people.
Right here,
you see them banners up there and stuff.
All the banners.
Yeah, all the banners.
I can't remember when, but at some point, my mom said forget it and moved out. Moved me with her, of course. And then we moved to the west side, and we stayed there for a while. It feels as if the west side has been forgotten in a sense. Like, yeah, they give us the fast food restaurants, the Starbucks, that McDonald's has been there forever, but they give us these fast food restaurants. But what about our new buildings? What about our new roads? If you see Lake Mead right there, tore up. But if you go up to Lake Mead and Rampart, nice smooth roads. But
the shelters can't let them in. The cops push them off the streets. What are they supposed to do? Businesses care so much about the outer, the homeless can't get past an interview, so leave it to the nonprofits to pick up the slack. This whole poverty cycle is chopped and screwed. Speaking of chopped and screwed, the school district is complete trash. Out of all 50 states, we're the very last. Legislature already has us underfunded, so the hood has to cut zero into half. It's not rocket science. Do the math.
What is your name and what is the name of the establishment that we're in?
Mario Berlanga. This is Mario's Westside Market.
Okay. You live here, right? In the area?
I make it a point to employ people in the neighborhood. I'm a strong believer that you have to give back to where you do business, and that's why I employ people around the neighborhood. And then you have some people that it has a little criminal history, and nobody wants to employ them because they have the criminal history. But if you don't give them a second chance, if you don't give people a second chance, they got to go back to what they were doing to survive. So I believe in giving people a second chance, and and employing them, even if they have a criminal history, because that's the only way they're going to make it. How you doing? I also, like for our seniors, I have in the back I have a board, and I'll let people charge. When they run out of money, I'll let them assign charge for their groceries.
Like a tab.
Like a tab, yeah, exactly what it is. And then, they come in, they pay, and they get their Social Security check and stuff. And, we get most of it back, but there's a lot that we don't. I mean, some that we don't, but hey, just part of doing business. This is Sam Johnson. This is the gentleman I was telling you that got me involved in the business.
Nice to meet you, sir. Okay.
He just went to the back. He just went that way.
Perfect. Perfect.
Actually, the biggest challenge would be the economics of the area. Our business is month to month. It seems like it strolls the same way. The first of the month, first 2 weeks, it's doing great. And then the third week, it starts going down. Third, fourth week, and then the first of the month, it comes back. And it's just the same thing every month. And it's because, people, just run out of money. They run out of money, and it's a cycle, same cycle, each month. Well, they're adding, they added the Panda across the street. They added Taco Bell across the street, Del Taco. And that's all stuff that we need. But, in this neighborhood, I don't see a donut shop. I don't see a Dairy Queen. I don't see a Cleaners. So just that type of service, or a nice sit-down restaurant like Applebee's, or something like that people that our neighborhood can take their family to and have a sit-down dinner instead of a fast food dinner like the fast foods.
When I was told, and then of course, technical data started counting the churches. People through the workshops would indicate you'd have 18,000 people come into the neighborhood to go to the church on Sunday and then leave, but there was no place to eat. So again, these are people who have a tie to the community and don't necessarily live there, but they have their church in the West Side. They come, and they say, well, after we have no place to eat, and Applebee's was a chain restaurant that everyone seemed to have to talk about. There was no place to eat. The West Side has, I think, 34 churches. It's very high density of churches, and I did not believe that number when I was told. And then of course, technical data started counting the churches.
You can't buy a house, even though you're earning enough money to buy a house, you can't buy it. So what do? You engage in entertainment. You go to church. So you see more churches in the West Side community than you see anyplace else. Even today, you see a proliferation of churches. There's probably still, in the small African American community here, that historic community, there are about 52 churches. And we are talking about a very small area.
I'm Steve Clark. I'm the director of UNLV's Downtown Design Center. By practice, I'm a landscape architect, and I've been at UNLV since 2011. We started our first workshop, or we started the study in January of 2014. The plan was finally approved January of 2018, which is this year. There were the accusations and the weariness of the community really came out because no one had listened, and people actually didn't believe that we wanted to listen to their story. So the first day of the event, we listened, and by the end of the 3 days, the crossed arms went to hugs. It was the most incredible experience, and the most challenging of all projects I've ever done in my career, but the most satisfying. What was really interesting was amongst a lot of the debate and conflict within the neighborhood, there were common things that floated to the top. So, for example, the historic main street of the historic West Side, Jackson Avenue, a lot of people, that was like the number one thing that came to the top was revitalize Jackson Street. People were calling it Jackson Street.
Jackson Avenue, we call it Jackson Street, became the business corridor of that African American community.
The 100 plan for the historic West Side, being an official community plan and approved by the city, is going to protect that neighborhood. So any development that takes place within that neighborhood will then have to adhere to the guidelines within that neighborhood plan. Prior to that, any developer could have moved in and just swooped in and built a tower without really having to go through a process. Now with the plan in place, there's certain housing typologies and a certain approach to development that needs to happen through that process.
I'm hoping that that continues, that the West Side community, this historic Black community, becomes the cosmopolitan area in a way that no other area of the city is. I'm hoping that the vision of what housing is going to look like on the West Side become housing that is completely integrated.
The aspect is that the fact that the West Side hasn't been developed means that the infrastructure and what makes the West Side very special is still intact, and it can be protected, and it can be celebrated through future development.